What if the Taisho period of Japan never ended? The Taisho period, or Taisho era, is a period in the history of Japan dating from July 30th, 1912 to December 25th, 1926, coinciding with the reign of the Emperor Taisho. The new emperor was a sickly man, which prompted a shift in political power from the old group of elder statesmen, or genro, to the imperial Daido Japan and the democratic parties. Thus, the era is considered the time of the liberal movement known as the Taisho democracy in Japan. It is usually distinguished from the preceding chaotic Meiji period and the following militaristic-driven first part of the Showa period. So, much of this social unrest, political uprising, and cultural experimentation came to a halt on September 1st, 1923. That was the day of the Great Kanto earthquake, measuring 7.8 on the Richter scale. The force of the earthquake was so strong that a 93-ton Buddha statue 37 miles from the epicenter moved almost 2 feet. The disaster devastated the entire city of Tokyo, the third largest city in the world at the time, destroyed the port city of Yokohama, and caused large-scale destruction in the surrounding area. Using the social unrest as an excuse, the Japanese Imperial Army moved in to detain and arrest political activists that they believed were radicals. After events surrounding the earthquake, the relationship between the military and the emperor began to shift. According to the Meiji Constitution, the emperor led the army and the navy. However, all military decisions were actually made by the prime minister or high-level cabinet ministers. As political activists became more vocal, many were abducted and so were never seen again. More repression and violence soon followed. Prime Minister Hara was assassinated, and a Japanese anarchist attempted to assassinate Taisho's first son, Hirohito. By 1936, it was illegal for any ordinary Japanese citizen to even look at the emperor. So why did the Taisho democracy fail in addition to the Great Kanto earthquake? Well, there are three other main reasons. The first circumstance, the downturn of the world economy, had wreaked disaster with Japan's economy. The effects of World War I had permitted phenomenal industrial growth, but after the war ended, Japan had to compete with other industrial nations for economic dominance. This competition proved to be economically painful. The Japanese leadership were not used to such obstacles and thus proved to be slow to pass legislation to deal with this problem. Another factor that contributed to the Showa restoration was the Japanese Exclusion Act passed in 1924 by America to exclude Japanese immigrants. This affected the Japanese attitude that they were being viewed as inferior by Western nations. This view was strengthened further as a series of mishaps at the meetings of Versailles, where it appeared to Japan that Europe was not willing to surrender its positions in Asia. The Japanese legislation was not used to compromising in situations where it was being viewed weak and where negotiation acts seemed frivolous. Furthermore, the Japanese military had the conception that war with the West was inevitable, and compromise was simply a waste of time and effort. The third major circumstance was the independent Japanese military that utilized on the Taisho's democratic efforts that had failed to halt the economic recession and submission of the Japanese government to the West. The Japanese military maintained that the parliamentarian government that had capitulated to the West by making an unfavorable agreement about the size of the Japanese Navy and by reducing the size of the military. The straw that finally broke the horse's back was the 1929 depression that struck Japan, like it afflicted many other parts of the world, including Germany. So in order for democracy to persist, the West has to be more inclusive and less racist towards the Japanese. It was this outsider feeling that left Japan feeling as if a final showdown with the West was inevitable, and which boosted intense Japanese nationalism. Now, without this inferiority complex, would democracy persist? Well, when examining other failed interwar experiments with democracy, like Germany's Weimar Republic, the answer seems to be no. However, for the sake of this alternate history, let's presume that the democracy was firmly ingrained in the Japanese mindset by that time, and it was faced with less adversity in the interwar years. If the economy, the integral part of the Japanese nation, was relatively stable, society would also remain stable. If democracy were to persist, then first of all, Japan would not join in with Hitler and Mussolini in the Tripartite Pact. Of course, Hitler's operations in the European theater would be not hindered in the slightest, yet in the Pacific theater, the world would really be different. The US continues to ship raw materials to Japan as they did in our timeline. Japan never fights in the war, and even if it enters the Second World War, it will only be with the Allied powers. The US also never enters a war, since the attack on Pearl Harbor never happens. Throughout all of Asia, nations such as China and the Philippines can rest easy, and no vicious Japanese army comes their way. In our timeline, atrocities like the rape of Nanking are still ingrained in the collective mind of China even 70 years past the event. Now, how about the Philippines? Well, the Philippines is a wild card, and it's hard to tell if the US will grant it its independence faster or slower. This is because some people argue that the Japanese were necessary to foster the independence movement, while others say that the Japanese invasion hindered it. I'm going to say that the Philippines gets its independence faster in this timeline, since the US is trying to not look imperialist and have a colony, and it has no reason to prolong independence, with the Pacific at peace. Hitler is defeated in the European theater, and the atomic bombs are never developed nor dropped in Japan. The war is over at about the same time, since the US never enters a war, D-Day never happens, and the Soviets have to grind it out with the Nazis themselves. In China, with the communists will still likely win, gaining the support of the people even with no Japanese threat. The post-war world will likely have a communistic Russia spread its tendrils throughout most of Europe, while the US engages in a Cold War without nukes. Communism will be much more prevalent in such a world, although eventually it will be found as an unfeasible mode of governance like in our timeline and reduced to a few states. Today, Japan is still a prosperous nation as it is in our timeline. That's my take on the topic. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe for more great content, and this is Scholar of the World, signing out.